Hello and welcome to a new episode of On the Fringe. Now, as the name implies, this episode will be a bit different as I'm not covering direct gaming comparison, just a sort of fringe theory with some gaming as a tool, although the two may well be related as we'll see later on. Now, this is not a very deep dive as I think others cover that better than I can. This is more of an overview of the topic. Either way, let's get to it. I have a simple question for you. How real is your reality? I know this sounds like something I'd ask after a few doses of the devil's lettuce, but I mean it. How can we really decide how real is? I mean, everything we sense is just electrical impulses jumping around a blob of tissue in your head, so how hard would it be for an advanced civilization to be able to generate the right sense data on the fly? What if it's happening right now? The simulation hypothesis is the idea that our universe is a hyper-realistic simulation, much like the Matrix. I didn't want to use that analogy because everyone who covers this does, and because it tends to make people think that this is necessarily a bad thing if we are in fact in a simulation. The hypothesis itself does not assume any malice on the part of the simulator's creator or creators, just that we are in one. While originally just a thought experiment, some serious research has actually found reasons to support the idea. Let's go over a couple of them, then I'll discuss why even if we are in a simulation, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's start with an example that uses retro gaming since I haven't actually covered it here that much. Classic pixel game, every single thing you see on screen is built from small colored blocks called pixels, and by a careful arrangement of these colored blocks a full image is created. If you've ever seen a picture made from Lego blocks, then you've seen a macro-sized version of this idea. Now, it doesn't take a strong leap of faith to consider this being something in real life, and it actually is. Everyone knows that everything we see is made up of atoms, but those atoms, classified as baryons or baryonic matter, are further made up of tiny building blocks called quarks. Currently, quarks are the smallest things known to exist, but they're still bigger than the smallest distance known, the Planck length. Now, the Planck length is set as 10 to the negative 32nd power meters. The Planck length is set as 10 to the negative 32nd power meters and is so small that there's not even a theoretically possible device we know that can measure further. Every single bit of known physics completely breaks down when you consider the Planck length, and that's including quantum physics. We legitimately cannot view anything smaller than that. That's the same thing as in a vintage game having nothing smaller than a pixel. But a pixel is a building block that the bigger image is made from, while the Planck length is just the smallest length possible. What if we had something that we could build a universe from at that size? Thing is, we might. String theory is a collection of related theories that attempt the holy grail of physics, a grand theory of everything. Relativity accurately describes very large objects, while quantum physics accurately describes very small objects, but the two are fundamentally incompatible. But this theory of everything would merge these two into one theory that would describe everything in the universe. Now, grand theory of everything is absolutely another episode, but string theory is a major contender for this. It posits that at the Planck length there are one-dimensional strings that can vibrate. In the macroscopic world, the pitch of a note is determined by the vibrational frequency of that string, while on the quantum level, the vibration of a string determines whether it's matter or energy, and if so, what type. Much like how adjusting the vibration of a string gives you a different note on an instrument, each vibration of one-dimensional strings produces a different subatomic particle. From there, the various subatomic particles we know of, protons, neutrons, electrons, can produce our physical world. I know this sounds like a stretch, but let's look at it. Imagine the subatomic particles of pixels on the screen. By varying just the amounts of red, green, and blue, you can make any color imaginable. Similarly, by changing the amounts of protons and electrons in an atom, you make different elements. Each element has a certain amount of protons and electrons that determines its atomic number and therefore what element it actually is. The various combination of elements produce every substance in the physical world. For example, let's say you have 6 protons and 6 electrons and a couple neutrons. You create carbon, which is the basis of all life that we know. As an aside, neutrons have no charge, so they can be any number depending on how stable it makes the atom, because that does vary depending on the element. We call atoms of elements with different neutrons isotopes. So now we have a fundamental building block that exists beyond our ability to measure, or even our ability to theorize how to measure. This allows us by simple manipulation, now simple being a relative thing here, we can produce anything in this universe. In effect, we've found what may be the building blocks of the simulation, the real-life pixel. So we know how a simulation may work, but could a full-life simulator happen? The answer is surprisingly yes, and we've actually had it since the mid-20th century. This is the game of life, created by mathematician John Horton Conway in 1970. It's a very simple electronic system where the user creates the initial setup, which is what pixel will turn black at start. It has 4 rules. 1. Any live cell with fewer than 2 live neighbors dies, as if by underpopulation. 2. Any live cell with 2 or 3 live neighbors lives on to the next generation. 3. Any live cell with more than 3 neighbors dies as if by overpopulation. And 4. Any dead cell with exactly 3 live neighbors becomes a live cell as if by reproduction. With just these 4 simple instructions, a living world is created. Small collections of pixels evolve into new forms, often similar to ways that have been described before. There are even names for some of the images that come about of this simulation, and I fully encourage you to take a look at the Wikipedia article listed below and a link to an online version of playing it. Now, there have been full Turing machines made inside this system. I'll put a link in the description for more info, but the simple thing is Turing machines are the basic idea of a computer. With just 4 simple rules, we can actually make a calculating machine out of nothing. But in any case, despite this astounding complexity that can form from this program, it was originally designed for computers that weren't even 8-bit systems. They've even designed business card size implementation of the game with LEDs, which shows just how easily we can make this. So, okay, for sake of argument, let's say that we are in a simulation. We are currently advancing our computer power fast enough that we can have pretty good virtual worlds, and with the advent of quantum computing, it's only a matter of time before we can come up with a realistic simulator. So, we can assume that those in a simulation will eventually create one of their own, thereby creating countless simulations from just the one in the real world. And if that's true, what would be the odds of landing in the real world versus simulation? Just about 0, isn't it? That's become a solid argument in favor of this theory. And I understand. You may be thinking, how could we simulate every atom in the universe at once without the computing system just failing from the sheer complexity? And you'd have a very solid argument. The workaround is that only by rendering base reality when it's observed, the rest of the universe loads when it's needed, saving lots of process power, a system we actually do use in current video games. Now, this interestingly dovetails into the observer effect of quantum physics. This effect shows that until a particle is observed, it is a wave that follows all possible paths of that particle. Whenever observed, this wave functions collapse and it acts as a particle. We've proven this in one of the most legendary experiments of all time, the double slit experiment. What this did was have a beam of electrons fired at a wall that had 2 slits to measure what the background looked like. To their surprise, when they looked at it, it wasn't the 2 straight marks you would expect, but a wave interference pattern like waves of water hitting the wall and bouncing back. However, when they put sensors on the wall to measure the waves, then they got the expected results from before, showing that the particles, by being observed, actually act like particles instead of waves. I'll put a link to an amazing video by PBS Spacetime that goes farther in depth in this amazing experiment. Now, the 2 main questions with this theory are, how do they make it real, and why does it exist? Now, the first one's rather simple. All of our experiences, feelings, and senses are simply electrical impulses traveling our nerves and into our brains. In fact, one thought experiment describes how in an infinite universe, matter would eventually coalesce via the law of averages to form an intact human brain with their memories created by the placement of electrons in that brain. This is called a Boltzmann brain, and it's definitely going to be another episode. Simply put, there is no way that brain can know the memories it possesses aren't real. There's a famous philosophical thought experiment that said, if we were created at this moment with our memories intact, how would we know that we were created here and this wasn't just memories implanted? Now, these are the same as electrical impulses generated naturally, and we've actually come close to doing this with technology. Now to the big question, why? The honest answer? There's no way to tell. It's hard to guess what even something like another human is going to do, let alone an incredibly advanced civilization that can create a simulation like this. While most media, of course, depicts this as being a sinister thing like The Matrix, there's no reason to believe that has to be true. It could be the simulation is a game like what we have now, or even just to see what happened given certain parameters. Maybe an alternate history scenario, or one of the ideas that I really like best is that this simulation is a historical one created by future humanity. In this way, the simulation, are just us looking back. Personally, I am a believer in the simulation hypothesis as it follows a logical progression of technology, and the arguments do make more sense to me. And let's face it explains a lot of weirdness in this universe. I highly recommend you check out the discussion Neil deGrasse Tyson's done on this topic, as well as Elon Musk's description from his appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast. Links are in the description. Hope you enjoyed this episode and maybe learned something. If you have any more questions about simulation theory, please check the links and videos I've got in the description below as I go further in depth to this incredible subject. And as always, thanks for watching.